Welcome, everyone. My name is Uwe Brandis. I'm the Executive Director of the Urban and Regional Planning Program here at Georgetown University. And welcome to our last speakers event of the Fall Speakers Series. This has been our inaugural speaker series, coinciding with the creation of the degree program here at Georgetown. We have had a very rich series of speakers this fall, primarily from the public sector, really spanning the region, spanning the different kinds of agencies that are making important decisions about the future of Washington, D.C. And it is with great pleasure that we host our final speaker today, Shyam Kannan, who joins us from the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Administration? Authority. And Shyam is the Director of Planning. Just a quick note on Shyam. Shyam has a really interesting background, both of working in the public sector, but importantly also working in the private sector, where he was one of the foremost land use and master plan community business analysts, and so he has a decidedly economic perspective that he brings to the table. But importantly now, he's in this really important and strategic position at Metro, where he's overseeing both the long-term capital planning, not just of the system itself, but also of all of the land and associated assets to the system. And as we've heard from many of our previous speakers, you know, Washington has many jurisdictions. It's really a tri-state area, but one thing that all of the jurisdictions have in common is that the metro system serves them. So to hear more about the current challenges and your perspective on the region, we welcome Shyam Kannan to Georgetown.
Thanks, Uwe. Much appreciated. And before we even get started, I have to, it's a thrill and also terrifying to have Ellen McCarthy here in the audience, for whom I worked. And I will say I'm finally a planning director. So thanks for the encouragement. Much appreciated. So yeah, the things that really bind the DC region together are, of course, Metro and the Washington Redskins, now more so Metro than ever. So better luck next year, everybody. We're going to talk about, well, you know, we're having a great year. Exactly right. So we're going to talk about stuff that isn't so sexy from a real estate perspective. We're going to talk about power. We're going to talk about tunnels. We're going to talk about how difficult it is to both source, fund, and finance both of those things, and the extent to which really our regional economy is really tied to both of those elements, and the extent to which we are able to fund and or finance more of that going forward will be a good thing for us. But again, notoriously difficult to fund and finance. So let's just start. If you would mind closing your eyes for half a moment. You don't have to if you don't feel like 4:30 is the right time to do that. But if you would imagine 1 million more cars on the road, if you would imagine your auto commute being 15 minutes longer each way, if you would imagine building 200,000 additional parking spaces in and around the downtown core, which would be essentially the equivalent of 5-story parking garages all the way from the White House all the way up to the zoo. If you would imagine air quality, it no longer is in compliance, and this summer was actually the first summer in many years where we did not have a code orange or code red day, which is a testament to the extent to which we have been able to better organize our land use and transportation resources. Well, all of these things would be unfortunately true in a world without Metro, but fortunately, our leaders several years ago, roughly 47 of them, got together and realized that the region could in fact be built around rails, buses, and roads, not just roads. So we don't need to imagine a world without Metro, but instead, we end up with this. I'm going to show you something kind of fun here. And what you can see here, this is a 4 a.m. to 4 a.m. Oh, you can't see a darn thing here. How do we get the lights to cooperate with me? Can we put the lights down here? Thank you. Let's see if we can do this again. Lovely. That should work. Okay, now you can take your naps. But this is a very cool animation that shows us all the different transit elements in the region, not just Metro, but includes a circulator, includes VRE and MARC. And instead of having a region where we experience a million more cars on the road, we have, in essence, a circulatory system that's focused around transit. And as the day progresses, you can see the lines are colored, but you can also see not only the downtown here in DC, but also Rosslyn, depending on city, light up with transit trips. You can also see some of the MTA buses. They're shuttling folks back and forth, and the MARC as well as the regional bus providers. So we are fortunate that we don't have to deal with this world without Metro, and instead we have a very dynamic, very vibrant, transit-oriented region. I think it's difficult for many of us to realize what this region would look like, but not just us, but also our 16 partner agencies that provide transit on a daily basis and take about 4 million trips 2 million trips off the road every single day. So that's a good thing. And we're hoping to add to this going forward, especially what we don't see here, of course, Silver Line, we don't see Purple Line, we don't see the proposed streetcar network because those right now aren't actually being executed. Let's see if we can get this. Oh, look. Good. And if you don't mind, we'll keep the lights dim if you're comfortable with that. So why is this happening? Why do we care? Well, we care because this is actually now not so much about, in addition to being about mobility, it's also about jobs. And this graphic actually comes to us from the Journal last Thursday. And the title here of the slide actually comes from Lee Gallagher's most recent book, The End of the Suburbs. What we're finding is that companies, Archer Daniels Midland, Motorola, these are not urban pioneers, but they are moving back to the city in large numbers. And we're seeing that, of course, here in DC, where the half-mile radius around our Metro Rail stations, which only comprise 1.2% of the region's land base, they capture around 14% of the region's job growth over the last 10 years. It's 4 to 5 times higher than the region as a whole. We also know that property is worth more at around Metro Station. So the infrastructure that we built actually had a return on investment, which, while no one has actually tried to measure it in terms of $4 out for every dollar in, has been significant. And what it's allowed us to do is to generate value that the jurisdictions can use to pay for local services. So right now, every single year, the Metro system, because it was infrastructure that created adjacent area land value, was developed, we can pay for 2,600 teachers, 3,400 police officers, 800 miles of lane paving every single year, a few dozen schools. There's about $3 billion in property adjacent to Metro Rail, and there's a good chunk of that value which would not have been there but not for the infrastructure investment. So what was a public works infrastructure investment back in the 60s has turned into a value generator that the jurisdictions can actually use. In Arlington County, if anyone here is an Arlington resident, hands up. No? Bob, thanks. Good. Oh, well, you can trumpet the fact that you have some of the lowest tax rates in the entire region, but also are able to provide a much more sophisticated, robust level of citizen services, primarily because planners, as venture capitalists of the public sector, thought about value generation from transit 30 years ago and were able to execute that. So good for you. Gold star. So where are we today? This is a concept which I like to share with folks. And I want to remind folks, from an infrastructure standpoint, it's not sexy. It's very difficult to execute, very difficult to build. And once you build it, no one wants to reinvest in it. So Metro system is a bicentennial system. It was designed to open in '76. First connection opened up between Rhode Island Avenue and Farragut North. You could actually go and tour the tunnels way back when, as it was being built. And there was a tremendous amount of pride, a tremendous amount of excitement about having what at the time was going to be a globally leading transit network with automatic computerized train control, with an integrated bus system management program that would have 8-car trains running every 90 seconds, whisking patrons to and from their destination on insulated and cushioned tracks so that the ride would not be bumpy. Well, that didn't exactly play out the way we thought it was going to play out. So we got the system up and running, and over time we gradually defunded it. While New York's MTA spent since 1983 roughly $180 billion in capital reinvestment, we spent next to nothing in capital reinvestment above and beyond simply building the system, which was finally completed in 2001. And so you can see through this era of complacency, by not reinvesting in infrastructure, we started to experience a system degradation that unfortunately many of you who might be my customers today experience on a daily basis, where you have either disrupted trains, we have the same train car, we have the same rolling stock in operation today that was in operation in 1976. It's a little bit embarrassing. In 76, you had the first supercomputer. The Cray supercomputer was invented, and it took up a room about this size, weighed about 4 tons, and could do basic arithmetic. I can now do more than that on my iPhone, but we still run those trains. So right now we are we've gone past complacency, we're through discontent, and hopefully we are rebuilding. I'll talk to you a little bit about what that means, but it meant a lot of begging, borrowing, and stealing. And one more animation here that I can bring the lights up, but in the intervening 37 years, we went from a system that was really ferrying suburban riders into the city to go to work, into a system that is much more now the connective tissue for a demographic and for a workforce that uses it much like as I've called it a horizontal escalator. I'm going to show you a day in the life of Metro this is just Metro Rail from a ridership standpoint, and you'll see the boardings and where those boardings are taking place. It's pretty fascinating. There's also 2 sporting events in this particular animation, so you'll be able to see those pop up as well. But the reality here is that we're not necessarily seeing the system perform the function that we thought it would have performed in '67. It doesn't simply ferry suburban workers in and out of the district to work. As you can see, the days sort of pulse along. The vast majority of the boardings and lightings are taking place at or near the system core. And we do see that, oh, there you go. There was a Caps game, it was a Wizards game, and there was a Nats game that particular night. So you probably saw those 2 pieces pop. And again, 2 major anchor users of the Metro system that were not there when the system was envisioned way back when. So what's the problem? How do we end up with a system today where you've probably seen this in the paper, begging and borrowing for money? If I could run a bake sale outside, I would. And if I wore a hat, I would put it out and pass it along. And the fact of the matter is that as a nation, this is sort of the grade we get. We get a D+ from the civil engineers of this nation, who have decided that we just simply don't spend enough money on infrastructure. Now, transit, rails in particular, or rails as a subset actually get a C-. So rail, we're doing a little bit better than the grade that our infrastructure is getting as a whole. But roughly we're spending about 3% of our GDP on infrastructure, which tracks middle of the pack for the OECD nations. The question we have to ask ourselves is that good enough? Should we not, in fact, be better than middle of the pack for all of the OECD nations? Should we not, in fact, be world leading in terms of the investments in infrastructure, given the fact that we know that there's a return on investment in that infrastructure, and we are actually seeing those dollar ROIs play out today? I personally don't feel like it's good enough, but it's a very difficult political battle to fight. We could bring the lights back up. I won't be running any more animations. So what are we doing right now? At Metro, we're about the halfway point of what we call Metro Forward. It's a $5 billion 6-year capital reinvestment plan. Again, New York, $180 billion. Metro, $5 billion. I think we're being very efficient with your tax dollars. And we're about halfway through, and if you think about in an average year, a rail system about the size of Metro should be replacing anywhere between 10 and 13,000 railroad ties. Those are the wooden pieces of the rail network that you can see, just because of the wear and tear of the network. Last year we replaced 58,000, which means that what we're doing is we're catching up. We're catching up on deferred maintenance and deferred capital investments that never took place, that really do need to take place. And we're hopeful that by the time this is over, sometime end 2017, early 2018, we're hoping, we will have the system back to the place where it should have been all along. That's the good news. The bad news is that we'll have the system back to the place where it should have been all along, which means a design capacity which was envisioned back in 1967 when the adopted regional system plan was put together. The world is urbanizing at a rate that was perhaps not envisioned when the system was designed. If you are on the Green Line at all and perhaps getting on or off at Columbia Heights, you'll notice I've got one vertical transportation system there. The extent to which the demographic has moved back into cities and occupying these places and using the system is probably in many cases above and beyond that which was being envisioned. So there needs to be some level of expansion as well, both for this existing system as well as to connect the system to places that it was never envisioned to go. Back when the system was envisioned, Shady Grove was a Shady Grove. Bethesda was a Bob's Big Boy and a fill station. So we think about these places today as some of our big pinch points in the network. Uwe, you worked heartily, Ellen, you worked heartily on what now is the Capitol Riverfront, and that massive planning venture is resulting in huge ridership demands and needs on the system that frankly weren't being accounted for. And I can only run one train car set every 12 minutes during midday, during a time where workers who are trying to either contract with the federal government, the DOT side, or from a private sector standpoint would like to have headways that are more convenient than 12 minutes. They can't get there. So what do you do? Quick question, who can tell me what this picture, it's kind of a foggy, somewhat scary picture, but any ideas of what this is? It's not the Titanic. Not fair. It is a boat hull, however. And here's the danger in infrastructure. So I think I mentioned we're spending about $5 billion. That's all well and good. This is a boat hull. And what boats do is once you put a boat in water, that hull begins to degrade the instant it touches water. No matter how new that hull is, either it takes up organic material or if it's in salt water, certainly begins to degrade. It doesn't matter if you're driving the boat. If you dry dock it, fantastic, but you have to pay to dry dock it. Well, the same is true of the investments we're making in Metro today. Just because we spent the $5 billion doesn't mean that's going to carry us through for the next 30 years. The instant that material starts to go into service, it begins to degrade. You've got friction, you've got things that require lubrication, and in many times you have moving parts that by their very nature degrade. So this is the challenge. Once you've spent all that money, and the $5 billion seems like a lot of money, Maryland spends $2 billion in roads every single year. I don't think it's a lot of money, but that's just between you, me, and the lamppost. What do you do to keep that system going? So what we're doing is we're trying very hard to make sure that we have the political support and the private sector support to reinvest in that infrastructure. Now, given that it took so many years to put that $5 billion in place, it's a challenging political fight to convince our electeds, to convince our business community that indeed this wasn't enough. And when you're talking about dollars that end with the capital letter B, and you return to those funding partners and say, thanks, not enough, it's a challenging conversation to have. And before I sort of talk about what it is that we're planning on doing, this is sort of a snapshot into another system, another infrastructure system that also needs some help. These are the Pepco substation maps, and you can see that what we're showing here is their actual capacity vis-a-vis their demand. Red is bad, purple's very bad. And what's little known about Metro and Pepco is that when the tunnels were actually being built back in the late 60s, early 70s, Pepco was wise enough at the time to bury substation capacity and to link up with the tunnel building effort. And they, at that time, were able to buy themselves about 35, 40 years in capacity. Well, guess what? We're at 35 or 40 years. And as the district has urbanized, as Inner Montgomery County has urbanized, they're seeing demand draws that are really taxing their existing capacity. They're planning some work, but even after, this is a post-2018 work, you can see portions of the district that are experiencing significant rates of growth, certainly in towards 4 and 5, and also up in the upper Northwest. And not to mention what we're seeing out in wards 6 and 7. There are issues from an infrastructure standpoint at Pepco which also threaten the extent to which this region can continue to absorb growth. It's all well and good to permit projects till the sun sets, but if you can't supply reliable power to those projects, or if you can't get those occupants to and from where they want to go, the value of those projects certainly degrades. I don't think that the infrastructure quotient is what's driving this, but I will tell you that it is notable that 3 years ago we were the #1 commercial investment market in the nation. We are right now number 8. And that's a 3-year decline, and we're continuing to decline. This is one of those elements that can and should be part of our pitch to global capital and should in fact cement us as one of the top 10 global investment markets in the world. So I'm going to then switch gears. I'm going to talk about what we're doing parochially. I do want to talk a little bit about what we're planning to do to keep up with demand. Here are the key issues that we're facing at Metro. Certainly core capacity constraint. What that means is there's 26 stations in the rail network. About 85% of all of my customers on a daily basis either alight or transfer in those core stations. And if you've been in Gallery Place or Metro Center or L'Enfant or the Farragut's anytime recently, during rush hour, you know you're shoulder to shoulder, not only on the trains, but also in the stations. So we absolutely need to have some of that core capacity relief. We also know that this region is urbanizing in its suburban places, and there really aren't great suburban to suburban or regional activity center connections. So what do you do with a hub and spoke system and a bus network that really was built on top of old streetcar lines when you need to have connections across the Potomac, you have connections across the Anacostia that aren't there today? If you are a bus customer, you might be aware that more often than not, when you reach a jurisdictional boundary, you either have to get off your bus and transfer to a different provider or even change mode. It doesn't make a lot of sense for Metro to operate buses all the way up Wisconsin Avenue, stop at Friendship Heights, so that a bus customer can then transfer onto a ride-on bus to continue the ride up Rockville Pike. It's just one of those oddities that's a leftover from the days of yore. We also know that we need last mile solutions, including things like streetcar, capital bike share, and better pedestrian connections. When we model going forward how we can get more people off the road, the most important factor in driving individuals off of cars and onto transit is actually the walkability of the pedestrian environment. I could throw billions and billions and billions of dollars of transit at the map, but if you give me sidewalks, I can move the transit mode share up 10%. It's fascinating. So we certainly need that. And I'd like for individuals to be able to ride the commuter rails and the regional bus system and all the different regional providers and Metrobus and Metro Rail using one fair payment and reconciliation system. You can do that today, and for those of you who are taking the MARC up to Baltimore on the weekends, don't forget you can use your Smart Trip card up in Baltimore as well. But it's complicated, and it makes you feel like you're riding 7 different systems, which in some cases you are. But it should be simple to pay, plan, and take your ride. So at a large level, that's what we're doing. At a small level, it's a fun, you can probably recognize the map, except for the fact that what we do have is I'm going to move off screen for a second, I apologize. But we do have Silver Line Phase 1 and 2 snaking up towards Loudoun County. And green is good, red is bad. Green are areas where we certainly are able to provide service at or below our service threshold of 100 passengers per car. Red and purple means that those cars are very, very crowded. This is our 2040 projection of the rail network. We are already super crowded in the vast majority of the network and in the brand new, yet to be in operation Silver Line. This is the traditional growth forecast. If I use the COG smart growth forecast, which assumes that we're going to have much more growth in these regional activity centers, it gets even worse. So again, the challenge at Metro is how do you go back to funding partners who have just committed several $billion in infrastructure spending and let them know it wasn't enough? Especially in a political year where our jurisdictional partners in Virginia and Maryland are patting themselves on the back for passing new transportation funding legislation that is a step in the right direction, but I will say candidly, not enough. Way more money than to actually solve these problems. On the bus side, our buses ride on the roads, and we don't right now until 2015 when CCPY opens up. We don't yet have a true bus priority corridor network. We've proposed one at Metro, and I know that some of the jurisdictions are looking at BRT. CCPY's Crystal City Potomac Yards. I saw some heads going back and forth trying to wonder what the acronym was. And the challenge is that if my bus is stuck behind vehicles that are crawling along in traffic, then they are not going to move anyone more quickly or less quickly than vehicular traffic. It's a problem. For those of you who take our S routes, you know that 16th Street is extremely crowded. For those of you who travel up George Avenue, I've had customers tell me they call those lines the Amistad. What we'd like to do is we'd like to get those buses moving around cars, giving them signal priority, taking 60, 70 individuals who otherwise would be in a single occupancy vehicle, put them in a bus and get them to their destination faster. I can move my buses twice as fast and use half the fuel if we can actually invest in some of the signal infrastructure to give them priority, which essentially means that the buses can talk to the traffic signal. They can hold the green if they're approaching a traffic light that's about to turn red. They may have some lane prioritization either during the entire day or part of the day. These are simple fixes that do work in other regions. We certainly can have those fixed here. And this is an interesting one as well, metro access. We are required by law, by the federal government to provide mobility solutions for those that are in need of specialized transportation solutions. And the restriction is that you have to be within a certain radius of the metro rail station in order to receive that service. As this region ages, and I know, Uwe, we were talking with one of your students earlier who was really involved in looking at an aging demographic. We're looking at a doubling in our patronage for metro access. Now, when the previous administration defunded Medicaid, what happened was all of the local service providers that were actually providing medical necessity trips to those who needed specialized transportation, they closed up shop, pushed all those customers back to Metro. Well, guess what? At $50 a trip, it's not a great bargain for us to be providing trips to and from dialysis centers. So what do we do if the region's growing, we're adding all this patronage, and oh, by the way, since this is required by federal law, the only way to accommodate this without additional spending in the infrastructure is to cut service, because we have to balance our books as well. So fascinating problems to have. And then this spaghetti wire, these are all different surface transportation issues we're dealing with right now, including Route 7 streetcar, Purple Line, DC streetcar. There are all these other surface transportation priorities that are all competing for those same limited dollars. So all of this is to say infrastructure is expensive. It's not more expensive than the return on investment. It's very difficult to fund because it's not sexy. But if you don't have it, you're going to have huge mobility problems. And with the mobility problems, you cease to be as economically competitive, either for the talent that wants to live in an urban place or for the companies that want to take advantage of that talent. So from our side, what are we going to do? So first and foremost, I won't go through this in the slides, but safety first. We absolutely want Metro to be the safest ride in the region. And we've made great strides to making sure it's there. And for those of you who've been on the system recently, we know that you have been enduring some commutes sometimes which aren't ideal, but I do want to stress too that what we're focused on doing right now is implementing all of the NTSB recommendations and getting the system as safe as humanly possible. Once it's there, we need to solve some of the core issues. I mentioned that we're going to need at least another set of rail lines in and around the downtown core and in Northern Virginia to accommodate demand. We're going to need to expand some of the stations that we have in the system today. Metro Center, too small. L'Enfant Plaza, too small. Union Station, too small, not enough Metro. The Farragut's, too small. We're going to absolutely need to be able to have that last mile solution, so we're thrilled that DC is proposing a streetcar network. We want to make sure that those projects are collaborative and not competitive. And finally, we also need to make sure that we have these system connections across boundaries. You should not need to stop at the county line in order to continue your ride. You should be able to take that ride seamlessly. We in DC have some of the most mobile commuters in the entire nation in terms of county-to-county job migration patterns. So if the citizen is agnostic to where they live and work from a regional mobility standpoint, so should their transportation system. Some of the issues that we found when we took a look at how you solve this is that every single time we extend the line, and everyone that I meet, I've coached my wife into making sure that she doesn't tell people what I do for a living when we go to dinner parties. It's problematic. But every now and then it leaks out, and then you have to why is that bus not stopping? I'll get to that later. Ellen, you've had bigger problems to face in your days. But every single time we think about extending the system, we run into a core capacity problem, which means that regardless of how laudable a system extension might look like on paper, it exacerbates the problems we have in the 26 core stations. So before we can do system extensions, we have to resolve core capacity. We also don't have enough parking. Now, as an urbanist, this is anathema to what it is that I wake up every single morning and think the world should look like. However, every single time I model this, I find that if I take away, especially at my terminal stations, if I take away parking and replace it with TOD, I can't replace the ridership without going to development densities that are way above anything that the local jurisdictions would have ever considered. We're talking about 30, 40-story buildings for acres and acres and acres of development. The market can't bear that. So there's this balance between trying to take areas that can and should be more walkable and driving demand, as I mentioned before, and preserving access to the system for those who have to access the system by car. We don't have enough parking today. We're at 114% of capacity utilization. So we need to be able to keep up with parking demand tomorrow. Otherwise, we're going to be flatlined in terms of total ridership. Walkability I mentioned before, and then also making sure that we can connect those regional activity centers. So this is our infrastructure plan right now. There are 6 key components. We'd like to be able to move the system to 100% 8-car trains. And what that means is right now, if you're on the system in the morning, you'll see the destination, you'll see then a number that tells you how many cars are in your consist. And most of the time in rush hour, we're running 8-car trains. During midday, certainly we scale back to 6-car trains. If I can get all 8-car trains during rush hour, I can move 35,000 additional trips per hour in the peak period in the peak direction. So it's the equivalent of building a 16 or 18 lane highway into downtown DC. We certainly need to do that. When the system was envisioned, it was thought that by the 90s you'd be running 8-car trains every 90 seconds. The 90 seconds is not quite feasible, but 8-car trains certainly are. We want to expand stations. I'm going to show you some slides of what we're looking at, and I won't spend a ton of time going through that, but this is the $6 billion question. It's very expensive to do, but I believe, based on what we've shown you today, that the ROI is good, and certainly it's necessary for mobility. We want to put some pedestrian links. There should be no reason to be able to prevent you from walking from Metro Center to Gallery Place, from walking from the 2 Farragut's. It gets you off the system to your destination more rapidly and also preserves core capacity. We need a true regional bus rapid transit network, and that means not just the buses, but also the roadway treatments to keep those buses moving. You'll see that we do need to have some infrastructure. There are some technical vagaries in rail planning, pocket tracks and turnbacks. We want to expand the Rosslyn Station, and what you see here is we're going to be adding silver to a station that's already accommodating orange and blue. Well, I'm already running as many train car sets through Rosslyn as I can. So what happens when I add silver? Well, I've got to cut back on another line, which will be blue, unfortunately, in the near term. If we can expand the Rosslyn Station, I can take the blue line, I can bifurcate that, I can continue to run, in fact expand the total number of train car service in and through that portal, and keep the whole system going. And finally, we'd like to be able to remove the, if you've been in the system recently, as early as today, and I know I heard it, you kind of hear Charlie Brown's mom talking to you in the stations. Wah, 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 wah. Not very modern. I'd like for you to be able to walk out of your door, plan your ride using your smartphone, pay for it, tap into the system, find out what time your flight is boarding as you're transferring from the bus to the rail network, check into your flight, and take it all the way out to Dulles Airport eventually, find out that it's delayed and book some lounge time. The 7000 series cars can actually talk to the air tower. That's good, but we need to actually have the back-end information technology backbone to be able to integrate that with mobile devices. We're moving closer to that. And then in the long term, extensions, new metro. I'm going to show you a map in a second. So let's talk about stations quickly. I got 12 stations that are right now in the strategic plan. They carry about 1/3 of the system boardings every single day. And the key issues, of course, are very, very crowded at the entrances. You get inside those stations, and if you're in rush hour or if there's an event, or if someone is not using Smart Trip media and is playing around with paper media, you're stuck behind them. The platforms are getting to the point where I'm concerned about safety. We certainly want to minimize any safety concerns, but there's no reason to get that crowded. And finally, the escalators, I think I mentioned an example where we only have one vertical transportation unit. There's no reason for that to continue to be the case, especially at a station like Union Station, which is by far our biggest transfer point in the system. It really is the 4th airport in the region. There's no reason for there to be an escalator queue at Union Station. That should be our Penn Central. So, Farragut's, you can kind of see a drawing here, which is fun. I don't think this has been shown in public, to be honest. So you can see what we're designing, which would connect your Farragut North and Farragut West. Now, there's a lot of kvetching from those who have been in the community for a long time, who claim that somehow there's actually some throughway that's pre-engineered underneath the park. I have not found that throughway underneath the park. I'm looking for it. But in the meantime, our friends at the National Park Service and NCPC are supportive of this concept, and I feel that we can actually make that pedestrian connection. It would save everyone anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes of travel time when you think about getting out, transferring, waiting for the next train, especially off-peak. So DuPont Circle, this is one we're actually trying to fund as well, but you can see these pink areas where we'd like to take the mezzanine, and we'd like to add a second set of vertical transportation units and also expand the length of those mezzes so that we can handle additional capacity. Foggy Bottom. Now, this is not Georgetown University, but another university which is an equally valid partner in our educational community that does need to have an additional entrance. We're certainly seeing, especially with, Ellen, I keep on going back to these stories, but I remember the Square 54 wars. Yes, I know you do. Those were inspired days. But now that you got that done, kudos to you. We need more transport. And so Foggy Bottom is a station that we're eyeing. Metro Center, again, you can see again the pink areas where we're looking to expand capacity, adding an opportunity. Right now, if you're navigating that station, you do have the two opportunities to go from the upper mez to the lower mez, then navigate your way through. One of the issues is accessibility, of course, because if you are in a mobility device, you really only have two options to enter and exit, and certainly to traverse the station. We want to make it easier for folks to get to their connections. Gallery Place, this is actually funded. So here's the good news. Gallery Place right now, and what I wish I had been able to do is to get the designers to turn them up that way, because this is north. But right now, there's a tremendous amount of queuing and a tremendous amount of volume that backs up both underneath AT&T Center, which is for what I call that southeast corner of Gallery. And also when you come into the Red Line platform area, there's a conflict between those that are coming up from green and yellow, those that are going to red, they bump into each other, and especially if you're trying to catch an 8-car train, the front of the train is, yeah, okay, good. So I don't need to explain that to you. So this diagonal essentially would allow someone to enter the station and put themselves actually at the front of the train platform without needing to fight their way through the sea of masses moving from green-yellow. And then Union, this is, I wish I could show this to you in a more zoomed-in fashion, but you can see on First Street, what we're doing is we're taking the pedestrian entrance from First Street that sort of comes off that Burnham Wall, moving it to the outside, doing so in an architecturally consistent fashion so that Daniel Burnham will not turn over in his grave. But also, we want to actually add additional mezzanine and vertical transportation capacity. You can see here not only additional staircase, but also bring an additional double bank of escalators here. And then finally, you can see this. If you come out of Union Station, you'll see there's a sign that says construction access. There's actually a 130-foot tunnel that we have some, Amtrak is using it as a commissary staging area right now, but that'll be able to take you all the way to H Street. So that's within the stations. Now this is the big piece, and you may have seen this in the news yesterday, but long term, the infrastructure needs are in the tens of billions of dollars. And the only way the system continues to function at a reasonable level, and that means providing the growing transit market as well as office and residential markets in and around the downtown cores, and I mean cores plural. There are multiple downtowns in this region, including those in Washington, D.C. and those in Northern Virginia. The only way to make this happen is to bifurcate some of the lines, separate green and yellow, separate orange and blue, add some express tracks on silver and orange so you can bypass the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor, and certainly create a second connection to Union Station. So what you can see here, and this is on my blog at planetmetro.com, what we're doing is we're proposing to bifurcate the blue and yellow and create a downtown loop, a loop line, which would connect all the region's downtowns. We're also proposing then to take silver and orange, split them off north of Rosslyn into an express line so that we can take about 18 minutes of travel time out of the cycle of someone that might be boarding at Wheelie Avenue or 772 and get them beyond the RB corridor. The RB corridor essentially becomes a local serving option. The other thing which this does is it doubles the capacity on green because you're no longer sharing a track between green and yellow. And it doubles the capacity on blue because blue is no longer having to interline the entire length of its trajectory with orange. So I started by talking about the history of the system and how complicated infrastructure, not complicated, the numbers that are involved. Suggesting to this group that the great challenge that we face at Metro is convincing others that these are worthy investments. They're investments that come with a letter B after them, and they're not sexy. I know that we're not alone in this game. George Hawkins at WASA or at DC Water has been fighting this fight for a long time, and he does have 2 tunnel boring machines currently active, hauling away 3 truckloads of dirt every hour, and he's been successful in convincing elected leaders that that's an important thing. We're really in need of folks like you and the business community and elected leaders to realize that these are infrastructure investments that are not only worth the money today, but also have huge returns on investment going forward. So with that, I'll take questions, and I actually stayed on schedule. How's that? Yes.
Wait for the mic here.
We'll close with you.
I was intrigued with your chart that showed the tax returns to the areas immediately around metro stations. Does that resonate with the local leaders of Arlington, D.C., Montgomery County, et cetera? Do they fully appreciate what's being returned to them versus what they give to you?
Is it appreciated?
Less that they give to you?
Well, remember that we send a big bill every single year to the region. Right now, I run about an 85% operating cost recovery on rail. It's more like 30% on bus. So there's an operating subsidy that's paid in to Metro in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year. So in that respect, the jurisdictional stewards look at the benefit, but they also realize that they have to send a bill. Now in Virginia, it's the actual jurisdictions that send the check to us. In Maryland, it's the state. So there's a difference in how they view the bill and whether or not they're actually seeing the full cost. All of which is to say they're thrilled that it gives them local property tax ratables, and there's always a counter argument regarding whether or not it's a wash in the end. My counter argument is, allow me to close the operating subsidy gap by putting more job centers on the eastern side of the Metro Rail network, so I don't have to sell empty seats every single morning going to Greenbelt, to New Carrollton, to Branch Avenue, to Largo. And then we'll see how big that operating subsidy is. I mean, every single year it's $150 million in rail subsidy, about $110 million of which is probably driven by selling empty seats or having empty seats go eastbound in the morning. So it's a complicated argument.
I see that you're already asking for billions of dollars just to get the system, up and running. But is there ever going to be a line that kind of circles the Beltway, to connect the outer suburbs together?
I don't have that presentation with me. So I'll answer your question while I pull something else up. So the answer is, we took a look at the Beltway line as an option, and what we found is that the actual ridership on that Beltway line was just abysmally low. It wasn't actually giving us a significant amount of ridership, certainly not enough to offset the capital expense of constructing it. So these were all the elements that we've tested, and then some. You'll see Beltway lines up there. If you thought of it, we tested it. And currently, the best way to connect these outer jurisdictions until the densities are higher is through bus.
Full disclaimer, I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I catch rail transit, light rail, to get here every day, or when I have school. I noticed that your recommendations did have something about region Pacific. I forget the exact wording that you had, but it was the lower one, and it had an arrow pointing to what I thought was Baltimore. But just as a general question, what is some of the data, or what is the data telling you about commutes to and from Baltimore, and how does that really connect, just from a philosophical standpoint, of connecting, I guess, housing and jobs to the D.C. region, which is expanding and won't be able to hold everything?
Great. So my non-transit planner hat, my economic development hat says we have a huge need for certain types of jobs here in the district and in the DC region. We have a huge demand, a labor pool in Baltimore, and more affordable housing. Connecting those two jurisdictions seems like the right thing to do. Do we do it using transit that is in existence, or do we do it through some other mode? I don't know. But you asked me philosophically, it makes sense to link those two economies. There's a variety of reasons that they're not linked either from a data standpoint or from an infrastructure standpoint today. But there are like-minded individuals that are trying to connect those dots.
I assume while you're looking at the rail or the various expansions, you're looking at opportunities for development costs through partnerships to help pay for them. And I've always wondered, with respect to the tunnel between Farragut North and Farragut West, the city has tried to encourage ground level retail. There's very high disposable income among the workers there. And yet banks and other service retail, whether it's shoe repair or dry cleaners or whatever, end up taking up some of that space. At any rate, I wondered whether there was the possibility of that tunnel to also include some retail or other convenience activities that would be able to cross-subsidize the cost of constructing it.
So that's your second question first, which is, as we're bringing this proposal out, there have been many, including the former mayor, who have suggested that might be something to explore in terms of financing this particular investment. So from our standpoint, we're thrilled, and we welcome anyone that wants to propose that as an option, and we would look at it and try and get it done that way. With regard to your first question, what's fascinating is that though we do joint development, every dollar that comes in from joint development and real estate related activities goes to pay off operating. So we can't use right now any of those dollars to pay for capital improvements. Very, very small amounts. And until, as long as we're running an operating subsidy, that will be, or operating deficit, that will be the case. Is it the right way to do things? I don't know. That's just the policy that we have right now.
Thanks. In the diagram you had of the loop proposal, that was the first time I'd actually seen a reference to a station at Haynes Point near the Jefferson Memorial.
Yeah.
Is there any talk of that being done independent of whether or not the loop becomes true? Because that would also be handy if you ever do the Y track connections between Rosslyn and Pentagon, to have a more flexible system and let people transfer between lines there too. Not to mention the tourists would love it.
So the Y connection doesn't work at Rosslyn. What he's referring to is, we were thinking originally about taking the orange line and essentially building an inner line connection underneath Arlington Cemetery and bringing it down to connect up. And from an engineering standpoint, the issue was that we could not get the depths at which we would have to tunnel were not consistent with where our existing rail tunnels were and the grades that are our maximum grades within the system. So if we're running a 4% grade maximum in terms of rail tunneling, and we had to catch up to existing tunnel and move around, we just couldn't make it work. Unless we took all the commercial property, a lot of the commercial property in Arlington and condemned it and took away the parking garages. It was non-starter. I haven't looked at the Potomac Park station as a standalone. I think my gut tells me the only reason it works is because there's a long distance to cover from areas that are generating ridership, but I don't believe that it would work from a modeling standpoint or from a ridership standpoint as a standalone. But I haven't done that, so I can't.
So like even for this diagram, you haven't talked to the Park Service about the usability of that?
NCPC has been our quarterback on this. So we have been to them, and they are helping to coordinate conversations, ongoing conversations between the Park Service and DOD, because we're going to need to be digging under the Pentagon again, which we did before, but we'll have to do it again. So far, so good.
Yeah, thanks. You had mentioned that there's some resistance to implementing the BRT lines so far. I was wondering, where is that centered? Where's that coming from? I mean, what's the source of the hesitancy? And I mean, is it? I mean, it seems to me that'd be the near-term, cost-efficient solution to alleviate some of the congestion on the far-reaching regional lines. I mean, is it really just coming from the other jurisdictions giving up their lanes on the highways,
Or on arterials. If you're a DOT director or if you're an elected official, communicating to your citizens that you're going to take a lane of traffic and you're going to remove it from use for buses, even for a portion of the day, is very, very difficult. And so the case that they have to make would be that the BRT lane with the lane and the preferential treatment would reduce traffic overall and make it easier for drivers to get to and from. And it's a leap of faith. You have to really believe the modeling. You have to really believe that where it's been tried elsewhere, it can work here. And that's not a leap of faith that, at least in this region, we've been willing to make yet. And I'm really excited about Crystal City Potomac Yard, because that will be the test case for showing that you can take a lane and dedicate it to transit, and it can work. So let's all root for CCPY to be a success. Primary corridor. You mean the priority corridor network? Okay. So, simple story. That's 24 of our bus routes carry 50% of our ridership. So we've proposed both fleet modifications and running way improvements to get those buses moving faster in traffic. Part of that would involve things like signal prioritization. Part of it is simply just route modification.
Hope it's worth it. I was wondering, you talked a lot about how Metro creates value, and some of that story is density. Have you looked to explore opportunities to capture some of that value to finance Metro?
That ties into Ellen's question earlier. We're a value creator, but not a value capturer. And that is partially just how we are governed and structured as an authority. MTA in New York was able to make modifications to their funding structure in the late 80s and start to capture some portion of the property transfer taxes as well as some slice of the actual value created. They essentially created a value creation corridor. We have not, I don't believe we've proposed to do that. And it's probably worth exploring, but right now it's not being proposed or looked at. Is that fair? Thanks, Suva. You good?
Thank you so much.
You mentioned the blog.
Yes, my blog is planetmetro.com. PLANIT metro.com.
That's great. And if you follow our Twitter feed, we'll link you to that. And that'll be a nice thing that we can do after this event. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We hope it won't be the last time you're here. You've given us a lot of food for thought. Clearly, these are core issues, not just to the Transit Authority, but also to all of the jurisdictions and really all the communities that the system serves. And I think you did a very nice job in describing that. This concludes the inaugural Fall Speakers Series. We're concluding it with a party downstairs, a holiday party. I hope everyone can join us. And thank you again for coming. Thank you very much.